family tree that includes the major figures. There's Albion, Keziah Davis, and Octavia, his wife. In the same generation, there's Johnston Elliott Jr., and we're going to go back to his father, Johnston Elliott Sr. Johnston Elliott Jr. is John
Davis. We got
so we're going to keep it
online.
straight.
Oh, yeah, Davis.
Yeah, we're doing.
John, mute yourself.
And John's wife, Esther Primrose. Albion and Octavia's son was Tuilar Jacques. John and Esther's daughter was Nellie Elliott. And TJ and Nellie's daughter was Esther Primrose, as well as many other Davises, including Elliot. Here's another family tree coming back to recent time. You see I'm going to zoom up here a little bit. There are the Jack Allen sons. Jack and Nancy Allen. And that was Bobby's son, of course, and here's her family tree in another way. Okay. Of course, Bobby had a brother named Elliot, and he would have his own family tree. Here's a quick map of downtown Marion, or Marion and environs. And I just wanted to give you a general reference here. This is the downtown around the Marion Square. This is the 7th Avenue Commercial District right in here. This is 8th Avenue, which is where many of the older homes are and were. They lead out of town a little bit to what is called the Pucker Street District. And this is where the White House, the big White House, the family house was. And behind it, off of 9th Avenue and 17th Street, are several other properties that related, that TJ developed. Down here is 6th Avenue, which had at one point the big rail line and trolley line. And so there were a couple of businesses located there that were important. So you see, everything is quite close by. On a nice day, you can walk the whole route. This is the iconographic photograph that many of you have probably already seen. And it's taken next to the porch of the White House. Both the Davis and Elliott families are represented across 3 generations. During the presentation, we'll introduce each member of this family and then revisit this whole photo later with IDs. And we'll learn why this picture was taken at a dramatic point in the family's fortunes. What you'll hear during the next 30 minutes or so is several episodes in the family histories with a narrative arc. So stay with me. Here we go.
Hey, Dad.
Yeah.
Just a quick question can you just briefly explain again what just kind of trace this line down to you?
Okay, backing up to this picture.
Yeah, that might help. Just because, yeah.
Okay, so here I am and my 5 brothers. Here are my parents, Jack and Nancy. There's Esther, and there's TJ, who's the major figure, a major figure in this narrative, and his 2 parents, Albion and Octavia, and Nellie's 2 parents, Johnston and Esther, and John's father, Johnston Elliott. Does that help put it in perspective?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, it'll be clear as we go along.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Okay, Marion. In 1838, Marion was the furthest place west of the Mississippi that was also a county seat, which suggested that law and order prevailed in the otherwise wild frontier territory. Iowa didn't become a state until 1846. Many veterans of the War of 1812 were offered land grants in Marion, which was virtually free land if you came out and settled it. Potential settlers in the East were tempted to Marion when they heard glowing tales from the early pioneers, like this account here. The financial panic of 1837 had gripped the entire young nation, including the Davises in rural Maine and the Elliots in central Ohio. So let's talk briefly about the Davis family origins. They reach back to Wales. They arrived in colonial America in the middle of the 1600s. There were 4 generations headed by a David Davis ancestor. I'm zooming in on the garrison that they built in this town called Oyster Bay Plantation. They lived in Durham. It was later called Durham, New Hampshire, and they lived there from about 1650. This is significant because there was a major battle with the Native Americans, supported by the French trappers, and the Davis line almost died out. For more about the Davis family in colonial America, there's another video I can send you through YouTube. There's a later Daniel Davis who fought in the Revolutionary War in the 1770s. He may have used his military pension to move north to Newfield, Maine during the 1790s. You see clearly the Davis property. Daniel's son, Thomas Davis, was the father of Albion Keziah Davis, who came to the frontier Midwest in the 1850s. The name Albion is of Latin and Celtic origin. It means white rock crag. It's an allusion to the white cliffs of Dover. So it also is an ancient poetic name for Britain. Albion was born in 1829 in Newfield, Maine. He had 9 siblings who grew up in this house with the cooking fireplace. Believe it or not, these are actual photos of the Davis homestead in Maine. This fireplace is really amazing. I mean, it was pretty typical for that time, but it's surprising that we have a picture of it. And this is where they would have cooked for a family of 9. In the 1850 Maine census, Albion was 21, the second oldest child. He was manager of the local saw and grist mill. He was also a carriage maker with 3 employees. They made both sleighs and wagons. Sleighs would have been very handy in Maine. In one of the censuses, Albion also identified himself as a farmer. In 1857, Albion Davis married his Newfield neighbor, Octavia Shellis. The Shellis family were Huguenot or French Protestants. Octavia's children were given French names like Tuilard Jacques. At age 18, Octavia had a serious fall and then a severe illness. She was left deaf in both ears. Later, she suffered a thrown stone accident that took out her left eye. You can tell in this early photo and many afterwards that she had a glass eye. In that same year of their marriage, 1857, there was an enormous financial panic that affected most of the US. It had begun in Europe. The young couple considered their options. As a farmer, Albion saw the opportunities available in the frontier middle territories of the young nation. In 1857 and 58, Albion and Octavia and a couple of Albion's brothers came west to farm in Clinton County, Iowa. They rented a farm near Miles. Octavia did housekeeping for local families, while the Davis men worked on the railroad crews and tended their farm. These are two bridges in Sabula and Clinton, Iowa, that they probably helped to build the rail beds for. They probably didn't stick around long enough to actually build the bridges, but they helped with the rail beds. And these were very shallow areas of the river, west and southwest of Marion. In 1875, wait a minute, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to show this because I love this wonderful photograph that shows eastern Iowa relative to Marion, but also this wonderful stock photograph of these guys working on the railroad. And you can see the Union soldiers still in their uniform. I believe this may have, there wasn't a lot of railroad building going on during the war. So I'm thinking that these guys kept their uniforms after the war and went to work on the railroads, which was a very popular thing for them to do. I wouldn't be surprised if there were some Southerners in there on this crew as well. But you see, they've got the big drum that would help bring the crews in when work was done. They had a lot of supplies, and they had this interesting place where they could lie down, a dormitory essentially, where they could sleep as they moved along building the railroads. Wonderful photograph. Whoops. Okay. In 1875, Albion, then age 45, and Octavia moved permanently to Marion and made it their home. He opened a hardware store. People needed a lot of tools to farm and build their homes, their new homes and businesses. There were about 1,500 people in Marion, and more steadily moving in from the east and the south. Young Twilar, or TJ, was 12 years old. By the time Albion his father reached the age of 60, he had gone from carriage making to farming, to railroad building, to hardware sales, and then on to stock and grain brokering, and back to railroad building. Their 1878 home was among the earliest built in Marion. There was a barn on the property well into the 20th century. Most residents had barns to house their horses. So the house is still in use 170 years after its construction. Of course, the front is an addition made in the 1970s, but you can still see the bones of the old house. Okay, so we're going to move on now to the Elliott side of the family. Here's Johnston out here, father of John Elliott, father of Nellie Elliott and Esther Primrose. Johnston Elliott Sr. is another one of the interesting discoveries in this family. Like Albion Davis, he was a classic example of the self-made man, striking out into the American frontier. He had little, if any, formal education, and yet he rose to positions of highest respect and influence in Marion. Briefly, he was born in Pennsylvania in 1802 of Scotch-Irish descent. In 1826, his family immigrated to Mount Vernon, Ohio. Mount Vernon was the county seat. Johnston was a tanner by trade, but he rose through appointed or elected roles as the area postmaster, deputy sheriff, auditor, and justice of the peace. In 1831, Johnston married Eliza Mills. They had 7 children together in Mount Vernon, Ohio. In 1857, they migrated by wagon train to Marion, Iowa. He was probably attracted to Marion because it too was a county seat. It would give him a chance to rise further. The Elliots were among the early families of Marion. The Elliots arrived 20 years after Marion's founding in 1838 and 20 years before Albion and Octavia Davis had settled there. When Johnston Elliott Sr. arrived with his family in the 1850s, the population of Marion was about 1,300 people. With Johnston's political and civic experience in Mount Vernon, a much larger city than Marion, he rose to become Marion's county judge. He would have served in this building, Marion's county courthouse. After 5 years, Johnston retired from judging. By 1875, he co-founded the Too Good and Elliott Bank, which was one of the highest taxpayers in the county. He lived another 25 years. Many of his children stayed in Marion and raised their families. His fourth child, Johnston Jr., or John Elliott, is our ancestor. According to John's biography, when he was, quote, a mere boy engaged in teaming between Marion and Muscatine, Iowa. Now, teaming means running a team of horses. It's the origin of the later term teamsters or truckers. He embarked in his own grocery business later in partnership with his brother, Milton Elliott. He retired from that business 25 years later. Marion was well known for breeding horses during and after the Civil War. John loved horses his whole life. His driving horse, Bushtail, was reproved in the local newspapers for endangering pedestrians along Main Street. Later in life, John raised trotters and had 100 of them at one time. In 1866, in Marion, John Elliott married Esther Primrose. She was from New York. They had 3 children, but the oldest, Nellie, was the only one who lived into adulthood. In 1878, when Nellie was 10 years old, her younger 2 siblings died of scarlet fever, Laverna, age 8, and George, age 2. Back in the 19th century, it was common to lose loved ones from epidemics. Still, it must have been tragic to lose 2 of your children. In 1889, 2 years after John Elliott, John's daughter Nellie married T.J. Davis, John Elliott turned his attention to the lumber business. He partnered with son-in-law T.J. for several years. By 1894, John and T.J. were also stockholders in the Farmers and Merchant State Bank of Marion. Between 1895 and 1901, John had prospered so well that he acquired large parcels of land in Marion that TJ later developed. Mr. Elliott died in 1899. Esther Primrose Elliott survived him by 30 years. Esther continued living in this house at 1414 8th Avenue. There's that address again. Her granddaughter, Esther Primrose Davis, was named after her, and they were very fond of one another. Esther Primrose Elliott was known to be gay, jolly, and thin. She was a patrician type who traveled a lot. She was 75 at the birth of Esther's first son, Jack, whom she is holding in this picture. She lived to be nearly 90. In 1881, Albion and Octavia's son, TJ, was 16 years old when he left school to work at the First National Bank. His desire to enter business and prosper was evident even at that early age. In 1887, he partnered in the business of Collar and Davis Grocers. At age 22, he married Nellie Scott Elliott. In 1886, Nellie Elliott did graduate from high school. A year later, at age 18, she married T.J. Davis. TJ was active in the Masonic Lodge, including at the state level, where in 1903, he served as the state treasurer. In 1909, he ran for the Iowa State Senate. He was a Democrat, but he did not win. These were the days when Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Party was splitting Democratic Party voters. In time, TJ became the largest stockholder in Marion's Building and Loan Association, with offices in the still beautifully maintained building off the main square. TJ's rising influence affected Marion's health and prosperity. In the 2 decades between 1887 and 1920, he went from grocers to lumber to banking to mortgage brokering to property development to fine home sales, including the development of entire new businesses and residential neighborhoods. It was helpful to have the patronage of his father-in-law, John. It was probably doubly helpful to have the credibility of his grandfather-in-law, Johnston Sr. But as the years wore on, TJ was a mover and shaker in his own right. TJ's rising influence affected Marion's health and prosperity. He went from grocers to wait a minute, excuse me, change pages. Starting with the undeveloped property that John Elliott had bought years before, TJ bought even more property with the idea of creating a new high-end Douglas Division district east of downtown. In 1901, 8th Avenue became the first street to be paved in Marion. Somehow, the city's fathers convinced a federal agency to declare Marion the healthiest city in the US. The area attracted many families building large homes. Many of them were likely financed by TJ's banks. The average citizens were so struck by the new grandeur of the district that they called it Pucker Street. It was not intended as a compliment. But TJ was undeterred. In fact, he may have considered that the perception of Pucker Street was an affirmation of the kind of elite district he was trying to create. It may sound crass in retrospect, but Marion was prosperous, and prosperous people needed a place to live as much as anyone else. At least that's the way TJ and his peers saw it. In 1894, TJ built what came to be called the White House in the center of a property that John Elliott had bought for Nellie and TJ. It was to become, and was, the centerpiece of the 8th Avenue district and a model for other neighbors to emulate, which they did, as you can see in the 2 adjacent homes to the right in the picture. Here are interior shots of the White House around 1910, as closely as I can guess. Anybody recognize any of their keepsakes? I'm going to zoom in here because this cord is interesting. That looks like an electric cord and a big electric light to me. I researched that the Edison light bulb was developed way back in 1880, but most of Iowa didn't get electricity in their homes until the 1930s. It would make sense that TJ would be among the first to get it, but it looks like it was kind of jerry-rigged there, and most of the other lamps may be gaslit. There were many elements to boosting Marion's appeal to businesses and residents. It was a prime example of Chamber of Commerce initiative. They expanded the rail access from Marion to many cities, including passenger and freight service, and they provided cable car service to Cedar Rapids. In 1901, they built an enormous racetrack and covered stadium and hosted trotting races. This would be the time when John Elliott would have expanded his stock of 100 trotting horses. The Lincoln Highway, which many of you may have heard of, was an enormous project in the early 1910s to build an automobile passage from one coast to the other. Automobiles had been growing in popularity and lowering in cost, making the idea of vacations by auto very appealing. They were also important for interstate commerce. I'm going to blow this up a little bit. Marion had lobbied hard to divert the road to Marion before going on to the larger town of Cedar Rapids, so that drivers would have an excuse to drive through Marion. In 1912, Henry Ford introduced the automobile assembly line. They were the rage. Automobiles were the rage, despite the fact that many roads across America were still unpaved. Within 4 years, there were 177,000 registered vehicles in Iowa alone. The grandest promotion of all was the publication in 1916 of Marion, the City Beautiful, full of scores of pictures of Marion's amenities and flowery testimonials. Other signs of TJ's success and privilege are captured in the photographs of his young family. Look at the curls and the girl's hair. In 1901, when Elliot was still a baby, the family went all the way to California for a family vacation. Esther attended Marion High School and then the National Park Seminary in Forest Park, Maryland, a girls' preparatory school. Then she attended Coe College, which was founded in 1851 as a co-ed college. Vassar didn't go co-ed until 1861, 10 years later. Coe was and is in nearby Cedar Rapids. Esther would have walked to the Marion trolley station and taken the trolley car back and forth each day. This shows her with a violin, but her instrument of choice was her singing voice. Meanwhile, homes in Pucker Street neighborhood were selling. Handsome homes, large and mid-sized, were popular. Many of them are still in evidence today. Those circles represent the same properties that TJ bought a couple of decades earlier. But now there's lots of streets and lots of homes. In late June of 1913, Esther married Marion Allen. TJ gave them a surprise car, the big Winston 6, like the one pictured here. Esther and Ami's first night of their honeymoon was at Palisades Park, which is still a popular place to visit along the Cedar River south of Cedar Rapids. During the next 9 months of 1913-14, Esther and Ami drove in their new car throughout Iowa and the northern Midwest to Michigan. Ami Frost Jack Allen was born in Lansing, Michigan, where Ami had accepted the teaching post at the state college. His field was animal husbandry. Unfortunately, soon after the end of Esther and Ami's honeymoon, TJ's boom period back in Marion was showing signs of ending. Simply stated, Marion began to lose its battle to compete with nearby Cedar Rapids. Marion's famous fresh streams were no match for the Cedar River's superior ability to carry commerce of all kinds along that river and the Mississippi River downstream. Further, Marion's access to major railroads and highways were eclipsed by Cedar Rapids, and the coveted Lincoln Highway Authority engineered a detour directly to Cedar Rapids, thereby cutting Marion off. The crowning blow was the loss of the Lynn County seat in 1919. The courthouse brought traffic to Marion for legal proceedings, as well as the maintenance and storage of all counties' vital records and property deeds. Hundreds of workers were employed in the courthouse and related service agencies. In Marion, real estate developers like TJ Davis, who had greatly leveraged their holdings, were having trouble finding buyers for their properties. Their banks were forcing foreclosures, even though the 1929 Wall Street crash was another 10 years away. Okay, I promised another view of this photograph and identification. I can blow it up a little bit. So there's the family, 3 generations, with the pastor in the middle, seat of honor. This picture captures the beginning of the end, let's see, yes, of the Davis family's prosperity. The occasion was the 1914 christening of Esther and MI's first son, A.F. Allen. It's in the front yard of the White House on 8th Avenue. There's several people not there. Octavia, with TJ's mother, was an 80-year-old invalid. She lived another 8 years to become the oldest resident of Marion. But even though she was just a block away, living in another home, she wasn't well enough to come join this photograph, or maybe she was too self-conscious. Nellie had been dead 4 years at this point. Within 3 years, in 1917, TJ retired as president of the First National Bank and devoted his time to real estate sales. That same year, the White House suffered a serious fire, but it was not so bad that it couldn't be restored well enough for TJ to resell it. He moved with young Donovan across the street to one of his other houses. Marion's volunteer fire units became paid, and the town bought better fire trucks. But the next year, in 1922, the restored, sold, and reoccupied White House burned down completely. Sadly, many of the old wood frame homes in the area burned down as well. The 1920s were anything but roaring in the Davis household. This sober picture is probably Christmas of 1921. Jack is in the lower right corner and looks to be about 7 years old. Elliot is in the back row on the right. It's likely the home of Laverna and Aubrey Reynolds, pictured on either side of the tree, which would have been the largest family home by then. Aubrey was a successful broker of stock animals. In that same year, TJ married Bess Panuska from the Bohemian region of the Czech Republic. Sadly, we don't have any pictures of her. The Marion downtown suffered another devastating fire, taking with it the county courthouse. In 1925, the interstate fairgrounds were closed. It eventually became the Marion Country Club. About the same time, family lore suggests that TJ went down to Texas to sell the 100 trotting horses. He was unsuccessful. Within 6 years, he was broke. He died in 1931. It's not a sad ending altogether. Marion today has 40,000 residents. It has many prosperous middle-class residential subdivisions as far as the eye can see. The 7th Avenue Business District, or Uptown, has restored many of the old buildings. Collins Aerospace, a United Technologies company, is a major employer. Much of the new development in the residential districts rely on the beautiful housing stock that reaches back to the 19th century. So the legacy of people like John Elliot and TJ Davis are still appreciated. Cedar Rapids enjoys the same quality and reputation. That is where many of the Elliot Davis family members lived. And that's the end and the beginning. I hope you all enjoyed it.
Very nice.
That's wonderful.
That was wonderful. Really.
Thank you, Davis.
Thank you, Davis.
Fantastic.
Davis.
Bravo, bravo.
Bravo.
Okay. Thank you all for being so attentive. I hope you found it to be an interesting story.
Wonderful.
Davis, can you just tell everybody so they're completely clear what this picture on the screen at the end is with Bobby and Ami and Jack?
Yes, I saw this on Peter's wall. It's I don't think there's another copy, but it Jack must be what, 1 or 2, and Ami has this wonderful tie. He was always so dapper. Esther looks less tired here than she did in other pictures, especially once she started having 5 other boys. But I just think it's just a classic photograph.
Hey, Dad, I have a question.
Yeah. James.
Is Albion the guy with the general store that was selling all that fancy 1800s medicine?
No. That was an Allen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was from the Allen side, and he was in Fort Madison, Iowa.
Iowa, hot spot.
Yeah,
Oh, Iowa.
yeah, another Iowa story.
There's a question on the chat. I don't know if she can read it or if you can read it.
Oh, I need to go there. I
Go
probably.
ahead and read it out, Rose. Oh, it says, you mentioned that John's biography. How did you get a hold of that? I was also wondering how exactly you're related to the Davises on this chat with us.
Okay, first question. The biographical information came from a couple of sources. In his case, there's a very good historical society in Marion that's collected a lot of material from various sources, newspaper accounts, obituaries, and even diaries. So that's where this material came from. How am I related to the Davises? Was that the second question?
I was also wondering how exactly we're related to the Davises on this chat with us.
Oh, okay. Well, there's only 2 branches represented here today. The Esther Davis Allen branch and the Elliot, actually his full name is Johnston Elliot Davis, but he was known as Elliot Davis, and he was the second youngest of the Davises of the TJ and Nellie Elliott family, and they are represented here today as well. There's Carolyn, who is married to Elliot's son, James. Did Carolyn make it on finally?
She's on.
Yes, I'm here.
Great. And her 3 kids, and her grandson, Jim, and his wife Megan. Did I get that right, Carolyn?
No, son is married to Megan, and they have a son, Elliot. And then our daughter, Anne, is also on, and her name is Ann Woodbury.
So the Jack Allen cousins that are represented here, how are they? So we're distant cousins. How many removed would that be in terms of lineage?
You share great-great-grandparents. Let's see.
Great grandparents, right? No, great.
I think great-great-grandparents. The common link is TJ and Elliot.
Yeah. Esther and Elliot are brother and sister.
I see.
That's right.
So great.
And in case it comes up, and the Esther was known familiarly by her grandchildren as Bobby.
Right.
Hey, Davis, I have a question.
Okay. Hi, Marcella.
Hi. Why was her nickname Bobby if her name was Esther?
I think it was John might be able to answer that best, but I think it was because we couldn't pronounce Esther as babies. Something like that.
Oh, okay.
Instead of Nana or Baba, it somehow became Bobby.
Okay.
Davis, I also have a question while we're unmuted. This is amazing research, and I would imagine it's very time consuming, and you have to really have a passion for it. When did you first start getting interested in this work? And can you talk a little bit about how you what was the triggering factor for you to get interested, and then how do you go about these investigations?
I would like to answer that question. I don't see can anybody hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So what happened was, somehow, I'd have to think about it for a while. I got a copy of a program that allowed you to explore your family tree, and I showed it to Davis. This is the what do they call it, Davis? The Mormon family. Pat and I got interested in it, and we put together what little teeny bit we could, and Davis took off and just ran with it, and it was amazing. I stepped back. I played no role after that. Davis this has got to be a life's work for Davis.
The primary impetus was the 50th wedding anniversary of Jack and Nancy in 1990. I had 2 kids, and I wanted to be able to tell them a little bit about where they came from. And we had a big family reunion up near South Haven, Michigan, one summer. And we surprised them with all sorts of fun presentations, skits, and my presentation was the preparation of the family story. I got hooked then, but because I was a 40-year-old working stiff, I let it go for a couple of decades, and during the last 10 years or so, I've really gotten back to it. And fortunately, that archaic software and the resources that were available in 1990 through the Church of Latter-day Saints, which was basically microfilm. That's about as microfiche, which is about as sophisticated as they got, has evolved to a point where there's all this wonderful, wonderful digitized material on the internet, and things like Ancestry.com. There's even DNA stuff, so you can with great certainty confirm that somebody is or is not related to you. But the biggest thing that I get jazzed about is being able to tell the story. I was telling Hillary the other day that I think this probably comes due to my Welsh background, which we come to honestly through the Davises. They were great storytellers, and they loved being together in festivals, not unlike the kind of digital festival we're enjoying today. So that's what jazzes me. I mean, a lot of people stop at the vital information questions like whether you're married or related to somebody on the Mayflower. I would love to have this kind of a challenge to translate all of that raw data into a narrative that you all get excited about.
Thank you.
I have a
Thank you,
question.
Davis.
Davis?
Yes, Paige.
Yes. I am intrigued as to the breadth of the move from Newton, Maine to Marion, Iowa,
Newfield, Maine.
Newfield, Maine.
Uh-huh.
Was it the early 1800s?
1857.
Not so early, but still a huge move. And what would the stories have been, or what would the fortune of the family have been that would have encouraged them to make that kind of a move?
That's a great question. By 1857, it wouldn't have been so difficult. As I skipped a passage, in fact, where it talks about after coming up there in 1857, they actually went back to Maine to fight in the Civil War with their Maine regiment. And then they went back out to Iowa.
Huh. Amazing.
They weren't that far from the Erie Canal, from the Great Lakes Passage. The Erie Canal opened in 1832. That was one way they could have done it, and steamboats were running very regularly up and around the Great Lakes and then back down the Illinois River to the Mississippi. For many, especially the farmers who probably had to tote along their oxen, they would have come across on the National Road. But as that one picture may have indicated to you, it was a well-developed, well-traveled route. Yes, it would have taken time, but it wouldn't have taken more than about a week if you were determined.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
And especially since by 1857, there were some railroads that had been built in the East. And so they could have well have taken the railroad partially to as far away as Ohio, and then continued by covered wagon. I don't mean to minimize the complexity or even the danger of that kind of a journey, but the appeal of the Midwest frontier was enormous.
People were dying all the time.
Yeah, back in the East, it was horrible. I mean, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and it was horrible in the cities. There was pollution. There was
1918. There was this huge pandemic, the Spanish flu.
Well, this was well before that. There was an 1860 breakout of cholera, which took that Allen that James was talking about. Actually, 1849. But as I said, the promise of fresh, clear water. Oh, thank you, Penny. She's delivering my wine. To all of us. And I think I finished enough of that. Let's break just long enough to sing Happy Birthday to Rod.
Yep.
Who celebrates his 65th birthday today. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you.
Love you, Rod. In case any of you were wondering, he is sitting in Nancy's wheelchair right now.
This is got to be a first for the whole family, connected all the way across the surface of the United States, saying happy birthday to Rod. Okay.
Yeah.
And
whose
birthday is tomorrow?
Yeah.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy
birthday, Molly. Happy birthday to you.
Peter, thank you for not singing. Sam, it's always a
What do you
It's always a
mean?
treat to hear you sing.
Sally muted me as I was singing.
Esther would have cringed.
You may know that Esther's voice was the pinnacle, and I was telling Elizabeth yesterday, my daughter Elizabeth was playing the piano, and she was singing, and I went and explained to her how Bobby, Esther Allen, sang in a big building that's right next door to the Leaning Tower of Pizza. And we went to that building and looked down to see where she sang. It's this huge auditorium. And she was invited to I don't know the story. Maybe somebody else does. Maybe Davis knows the story.
I don't.
You say the Leaning Tower of Pizza?
Yes.
The Leaning Tower of Pisa was next door to the building where she sang in. She was very proud of this event. She may have played the piano, but she definitely sang for sure.
I would like to see a show of hands of all the people that knew Elliot Davis. Really?
Me?
Come on, Meg, put your hand up. Who knew Elliot Davis? Put your hand up. John, you don't remember him?
Where would I have met him?
Oh, he came to visit the Valley several times. He's a wonderful, distinguished
The
gentleman.
problem was I was always off at Choate.
Oh, that's true. All right, who remembers Esther? Let's see a show of hands.
There she is. I see her.
Davis,
Okay.
can you stop sharing your screen so we can see each other?
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry.
You also have some questions building up on the chat.
Hey. Oh, hey.
There.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that, folks. I forgot.
Can I just inject something for a second here? So as far as Esther and Ami are concerned, I grew up with them in Batavia. They were in St. Charles. I spent huge amounts of time at their house. Bobby was my most favorite relative. She took me to Oswego to have my eyes tested. It was like a 4-hour drive, and it was probably only 50 miles or something. I mean, I really knew Bobby and Ami extremely well. And Ami used to tell us stories. We'd stay overnight there, and he'd make up stories about Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, and we'd sit there and listen to these stories while he shaved. He was so meticulous about shaving. It was amazing experience as a young child. And I think, Peter, didn't you experience this as well?
I have hundreds of weekends with Bobby and Ami, and staying over there for the whole weekend and listening to his stories of the little men and the little women in the forest
When he would shave.
and while he was shaving, and Bobby putting his glass of milk in the spindles of the staircase for him to drink while he was shaving, and
The pancakes.
and the what kind of
Buckwheat-
pancake? Buckwheat
buckwheat
pancakes.
Bobby would make buckwheat pancakes, and she kept the special pot out on the porch and would sit there and ferment for a couple of weeks, and then she'd bring it in and make these buckwheat pancakes.
Mm-hmm.
And when they built the house, we were all watching it being built. It was a big deal. And Paigey got married there, right, Paigey? And there was a big Ami was amazing with all of his.
I'm reviewing some of these chat questions. What caused the fire that destroyed the White House? I can't say with certainty. I feel almost certain that the fire was not started on purpose. That was possible considering the financial straits that TJ was beginning to experience. But reading many accounts about how poor the furnaces were for these large homes, people would try to skimp on the furnace. and they go away, or they'd have a cold winter evening and they'd crank up the furnace and they'd blow up. And the fire teams, you look at them, but they were jokes. They were volunteers. They would drag this wagon sometimes with water, and it had very, they were pumping the pressure to try to get it. And if the house was more than 1 story tall, forget about it. And it wasn't until after that first fire that they started to figure out that, gee, maybe we better have maybe pay these firemen, and we better invest in proper fire trucks. But they were still horse drawn. So by the time word got back that there was a fire and they got everything rigged up and they get there with a fire truck, I mean, the fire was probably raging in those beautiful wooden homes. So it was endemic. It was a major problem. And the fix was too little too late. It was a miracle, I think, that they were able to restore. That's another reason I don't think it was arson and fraud on TJ's part. They rebuilt it. It wasn't so serious that they couldn't restore it, and he was able to sell it to a family named Leaf. And Leaf wasn't in there more than 5 years before the entire house burned down, despite so-called improvements in their ability to fight fires. The origin of the name Amariah, it's a biblical name. It kind of like Keziah and Aunt Tu's full name, which was Arethusa. They found the Bible a wonderful source of family names.
Actually, Bobby's Bible, who has it today?
I do. There wasn't much in it.
Hey everybody, I just want to jump in and say that we considered Arethusa for Issa's name.
Oh.
That was on our list of maybes. And it was because of this family research that we knew about it. And Davis, your emails that you sent out, I found out about her and her name through an obituary that you sent out through an email chain. And while I was looking at names, I realized that's a really cool name. And it means like the spirit of the fountain or something. And she was, Arethusa was Esther's aunt that used to come and visit. Do we know much about her?
That's right. Very good. Esther's aunt, TJ's sister. She was. I didn't cover much about her, but
you don't see Davis talking on the screen right now.
No.
She was.
I don't know. That's okay.
Okay.
She was a spinster woman, never married. She too became deaf, but she was extremely caring, wonderful with everybody, including children. And she spent much of her life caring for her mother, Octavia. They lived together for many, many years.
I just want to interject that Lorenza said Arethusa is like a super hillbilly name.
Also, Zarathustra that's another name. Arethusa is a different name altogether. Sorry, Lorenza, a little lost in translation there.
Davis, I have a lot of curiosity regarding Nellie Scott Elliott, who only lived a very short period of time, Bobby's mother. Do we know a cause of death there?
No, but I wonder with her two siblings dying of scarlet fever, whether there was just a propensity there for poor health. I think she died a quite natural death. She was a tiny little thing. The good news is that she lived as long as she did.
Should we address Rod's request? He's the birthday boy.
I think that's Rosie's request.
Sorry, what was that?
I would love to.
Alan?
I would really appreciate that, James. This is Terry Allen in Batavia, Illinois, speaking, and I'm married to Mark Allen. And I would love to hear where our cousins are, and I'd like to have Lorenza introduced. And I think it's great.
Why don't we start with Lorenza?
Okay.
As I think probably the newest member of the family.
Hi, everyone.
Hi there.
Hi, Lorenza.
This is Lorenza. She's,
And where do you live right now?
we live in Santa Rosa, California, in Sonoma County, and we just moved here from Napa about a month and a half ago, just in time to lock down. And we, Lorenza's originally from Piedmont, Italy, or Torino, and she's here now, and she's part of the family. So let's give her a happy welcome.
Yeah.
Love you.
Let's go. Sorry, go ahead.
Lorenza, how is your family in Turin?
They are okay. Everybody's healthy, so that's the most important thing. But they are locked down. They can barely leave their homes, and they're super bored. It's not easy, but they are okay. So that's fine.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Carolyn, would you mind going down your family tree by way, and as you introduce people, they wave, so we can and maybe hear from them where they're living?
Yeah, this is Rose speaking. This was actually my request. Just like your name, who your grandparents are, and where you're currently living, like rapid fire, just to get everybody introduced would be awesome.
And I recommend having Davis, maybe you can call out the people on your screen, like first this person and then this person, and that'll go a lot more smoothly.
Okay, Carolyn.
Well, Mary in this family. I'm married to Jim, and we have 2 children. John.
He might need to use the box.
Hello?
Yes, we
can hear you.
Okay, fine, thank you. I live in Cedar Rapids, and I guess I'm the only one of a relative that is still in the area. But I married Jim Davis, and we have 2 children. John, who is married to Megan, and they have 1 son, James, and they live in Jacksonville, Florida. We also have a daughter who is married. Her name is Ann, and she was in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, but they moved over the pass, and they are now living in Victor, Idaho. And they have 1 daughter, and her name is Meg, or Margaret. What else would you like to know?
Here you go.
I would like to acknowledge Meg as a fellow genealogist. She and I have been in communication for several years now about the Davises. I would also like to acknowledge Marcelo as a budding genealogist. Wave, Marcelo. And Hillary has taken quite an interest. Victor is Paige's significant other, and he's doing a lot of genealogy. Anybody else caught the bug?
Davis, I think it might be good for Carolyn and John and Meg to know, and Ann, I mean, to know where these folks live.
I also
mean all of us?
His name is Joe Williams, and he is from California in the Sonoma area. But they're in Idaho.
Davis, off soon. Could we just rapid fire this and say where we're living? If maybe Penny, do you want to start out saying where you live?
Sure.
Obviously with Davis.
Yeah. Rose, can I suggest you call out the people and do like the first person and then the next person and then keep it going from there?
Yeah, Rose, you got this.
All right, Rose. I'm Penny. I'm married to Davis. My sons James and Dan are here. I'm a native Iowan from Des Moines and living in St. Louis.
Awesome. Next, Hillary, you're up.
Hi, everybody. It's Hillary and Marcelo Manzo here. We are coming to you live from Oakland, California. My parents are Mark and Terry Allen. My grandparents are Jack and Nancy Allen.
Great. Next, John Davis.
That's me. Hey, I'm sitting here with Meg. We are from Cedar Rapids originally. We now live in Florida, as my mom said.
Our son, James Elliott Davis, his girlfriend came over, so he did not join.
Right. But she's the genealogy, not me. So.
Cool. Great. Next, Gail, Paige, and Victor.
Gail, my grandparents were Bobby and Anna, and I live in Paige is my sister, and Victor is her partner. And Sam and Polly are my other significant family on this screen.
And where are you guys living?
Santa Fe, New Mexico.
New Mexico. Cool. And then, oh, I guess I haven't done mine. I'm Rose Allen. I am second daughter of Lane and Rebecca, the youngest of Amariah, Jack Allen's boys. So next I see, and I live in Boston, Massachusetts. Next I see Polly.
Hi, I'm Polly Robbins, Polly Allen Robbins, and I live in Portland, Oregon. My grandparents are Ami and Esther Allen. Meg and John, I would also like to point out that I have a son named James Davis.
Oh.
I have a daughter as well, who's not named James Davis.
That's cool.
That's good. Keeps it less confusing.
Awesome. Rod family. You're next. You got to unmute yourself.
I am the fifth son of Jack and Nancy. Bobby was my grandmother. I live in St. Charles, which is where Illinois, where Bobby and Ami raised their kids after they lived in Chicago for a while, and they lived here until they passed away in the 60s and 70s. And my youngest son is Davis Allen, which
Wave,
is
Davis.
And so we continue the use of the name. And Davis is on the phone or on the call. My youngest son, my daughter is right next to me here, Jennifer. She lives in Chicago, and her significant other, Robert Post, they both live in Chicago.
Great. Now it's Nancy.
And my wife is right here.
Now it's Davis. Maureen. And now it's Davis is up.
Okay.
Hey everyone, I'm Davis, son of Rodney. This is Hannah. You
want it up?
I guess it's
Maybe
you
sound
a little muffled.
She's my only partner, not as long term as Bobby though. We are currently spending our quarantine times in Burnsville, Minnesota. In this
Next,
weird house.
Nancy is up.
Hey, Nancy. Hi. I'm sitting here with my dad, Mark Allen.
Hi, everybody.
He's the third child of Jack and Nancy Allen. And I'm the third child of this guy right here. And my sister is Hillary and Esther, who is on here, and also Julie.
Great. And you guys live in?
And we live in Batavia, Illinois.
Awesome. Now we have Williams.
So that's me, Ann Woodbury, and Carolyn Davis is my mom, and Jim is my father, and Elliot Davis is my grandfather, and I live in Victor, Idaho, and my daughter Margaret, or Meg, her middle name is Davis, so the Davis name lives on.
Oh, good.
That was my mom, Terry Allen.
Hi, this is Terry Allen, Nancy and Mark. Hello.
Now, Stan.
Hi, my name is Sam Allen. I'm in Boulder, Colorado, and I'm the brother of the Santa Fe sisters, Paige and Gail. I'm the brother of Polly up in Portland, who we realized is her birthday tomorrow. My grandparents are Esther and Ann Mariah, and my parents are Tom and Paige Allen.
And where are you living?
Boulder, Colorado.
Great. Peter, you're next.
Hi, Peter and Sally. We live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and we've got 3 kids. Ben and outside of Denver with 4 kids, and Sarah outside of Denver with 2 kids, and Doug, who's married to Lauren, who are both here. So Doug and Lauren.
Doug and Lauren, are you guys on the line? I don't think they're on the line.
I think they got off. The chat said they got off.
Great. Could Meg go next?
Oh, well, I'm duped. I have my computer going, but in order to have the video work while I'm using the screen, I had to sign on to my laptop, or not laptop, but my iPad too. So I'm on there twice. I have family in Denver. My parents and brother live in Denver.
Okay, cool.
Okay, great. Dan, could you go?
Oh, hey, we got somebody's echo going on.
Sally.
That's better. All right, I'm gonna let Michelle go first, actually.
All right, hi, I'm Michelle Scortino. I am Dan's girlfriend. I grew up in the Chicagoland area. Currently, my mom resides in Aurora, so right down the road. And then I met Dan out here in Arizona, actually.
Yeah, we're in Phoenix, Arizona. Hi, I'm Dan Allen. I'm the son of Davis and Penny Allen, grandparents to Jack and Nancy. Grandson to Jack and Nancy. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Julie, you're up.
Hi, everybody. I'm Julie Allen, daughter of Mark and Terry, sister to Esther and Hillary and Nancy. And this is my partner, Bill Hall. We live in Duluth, Minnesota. And it's really nice to see you all right now. It's really warming my heart.
Great. Next is
Also,
Esther. Oh, sorry.
Everyone mute yourselves if you're not talking, please. Mwah.
Next is Esther.
Unmuted.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. I'm Esther Allen. This is my husband, Christopher Barkley. I'm the oldest daughter of Mark and Terry Allen. Chris and I live in Geneva, Illinois, right between Batavia and St. Charles. And we have Isa. That's what she's doing right now.
So cute.
Awesome. Rebecca and family, if they can unmute.
Hi,
them.
can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
So this is Lane, youngest of the Jack Allens, and Bobby and I were my grandparents, and we're in Batavia. We're in a duplex that my other grandfather helped set up, and on Union Avenue, 3rd time on Union Avenue. I'm here with Rebecca, my wife, who's from Denver, and Amy Allen, who is from Ukraine. Oh no, she's back now. And we'll be going back to medical school in July if all goes well. Amy, say hi.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Amy. Hi, Amy.
And Amy, where do you usually live?
Usually in Brooklyn.
New York. Great. Carolyn, I don't think you've introduced yourself yet.
Yes, you did.
Okay, my bad. And then John.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I'm Jack's eldest son, and John, Pete, Mark, Dave, Rod, Lane. That's the order of our family. And as I said earlier, Bobby, as the oldest son, Bobby took great interest in me, and she took careful care of my upraising, and she was involved in developing the name that I took all my life. My name is Jonathan Brandon Allen, and Bobby and my mother, Nancy, were standing on a corner to catch the bus. And they said, my mother was pregnant with me, and Bobby said, what are you going to call the baby? And she said, well, I'm not sure, Jonathan. And Bobby said, oh, that's great. You can call him Jont, after Johnstone. And I never, ever used the name Jonathan. It was always Jonty, Jonty. Then it became Jont. When I went away to school, which my mother went to school, private school, and I went away to school. And then Mom said, well, you're 16 years old, drop the Y. Maybe I was 14, I don't remember. So,
awesome. And John, where do you live?
Yeah, I was about to say that. Where do I live? We live in Illinois, in Champaign, Urbana, Illinois. And Pat is on the line. I think Pat was there. Yeah, there's Pat down here at the bottom on my screen. And we have our daughter, Elizabeth, and I have two children, Susan and Michael, who are unfortunately not on the call. And Elizabeth just had a baby, Mina, which is actually Philomena. You were talking about names. I don't quite know where Philomena came from, but Pat's going to tell us. Pat?
Pat, do you have anything to add?
John just asked where the name of Philomena came from. Her husband is a Catholic and says we got to have a baby that's named that's one of the saints. So Michael started to go down the list, and Elizabeth said no, and then they came to Philomena. She said, that sounds good. So that's how they got it.
Great. Did I miss anybody's introductions on the call?
That's so beautiful, Pat. Thank you for sharing.
Beautiful background.
Good job, Rose.
Awesome. I have to hop off, but it was so nice to meet all the distant cousins on here. And thank you so much, Davis, for presenting.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rose.
Yeah,
Love
and
you.
can I quick say
Love
that
you. Bye.
either Davis or I will put up this on YouTube or something. So we have everything saved on a recording.
Okay.
Davis, you